Okay, so when I was first presenting with symptoms, I immediately started going to urgent care. And at first, they weren't finding anything to explain my symptoms, and they'd give me some kinds of medication, and it might work for a day or so, and then it would start not working. And so I just continued to go to urgent care every time. I went probably 4 or 5 times in a matter of a few weeks. And then I had a very serendipitous ovarian cyst burst, which sent me to the ER. I had no idea what was going on. I was doubled over in pain. We still had no idea why I wasn't breathing right, and why I was in such pain and fatigued. And even though we were going down the road of a potential autoimmune disease, we had no idea what or what to do about it. So I went into the ER and for this completely separate issue, and the doctor was very nice in the ER, and he saw that I had an echocardiogram that was ordered. And so while we were waiting for some other tests, he allowed me to go ahead and get that echocardiogram. And in the end, they still could not figure out what the abdominal pain was caused by, so he offered to either wait and see or to do a CT of my abdomen. And I said I had too many unknowns going on with my body at that time and to please do the CT of my abdomen. He said, okay, we'll also go ahead and do one of your chest because I had an order on file that had not been executed yet. And so when I got back from the CTs, the doctor came and sat on my bedside, which I should have realized was really bad news, because if you've seen any movie, the doctor sits on your bedside. They're not sharing good news. And he said, well, I've got some good news and I've got some bad news. And he proceeded to tell me that they found out what was causing my abdominal pain, that it was a ruptured ovarian cyst. And having been very naive about what that meant, I'm thinking, oh, they're going to roll me into surgery, and I had been watching Grey's Anatomy, so I was very dramatic in my mind what was going to happen next with this cyst. And I said, okay, well, what's the good news? And he said, oh, honey, that was the good news. The bad news was that I had interstitial lung disease and pulmonary hypertension, and that's what the other two tests had found. Because they had found those things, I very quickly was able to get into a pulmonologist and a rheumatologist. And so over the next couple of days, I first saw the rheumatologist. I spent about an hour and a half with him. And he was so new to rheumatology, he had yet to be board certified. And I think that was actually to my favor. And he ordered about 15 blood tests and sent me on my way. And then I saw the pulmonologist. And typically at that point, I had been quite accustomed to going to doctors and having them order their array of tests and waiting around for the order. So I went in there just to see what test I was supposed to get at that point. And that was the first doctor that really clued me in that this was not something that I was just going to take some meds and get rid of. This was not something that antibiotics was going to kill off. I actually had a Disney trip planned with my family just a few weeks after all this was to take place, and I was still under the illusion that might actually happen. And so that doctor looked me in the eye and said to me, what you have is very dangerous, and it's very progressive, and it's bad. And if you were my relative, I would send you to Mayo Clinic so that they could do in a week what it might take us weeks or months of collaboration between all the specialists that you need. And so we started making plans to go to Mayo Clinic. That was a Wednesday. It was pretty shocking at that point. I still had to pick up Chinese dinner for the rest of my family because I had no idea I was going to be getting this kind of blunt, forced news that really my life was completely changed. And the next, in a couple of days from then, I actually received my lab results from the rheumatologist orders before he did. And so I called him on the phone to let him know what the pulmonologist had said, that I was going to be going to Mayo Clinic, and that one of the test results did in fact come back positive. And when I told him that the one that came back positive for me was one called Jo-1, which is one of the antibodies that is associated with antisynthetase syndrome, AS, and you could hear almost his jaw dropped to the floor. And he took a pretty long pause and said he had actually never met anyone that had ever had AS, and that he needed to now go do a lot of research, and that he would call me back. So that was my next clue that this was going to be a little more difficult and complicated than I had ever anticipated. He pretty much got off the hook at that point, because the following Sunday I flew out to Mayo Clinic in Arizona and spent the next 5 days with a team of their specialists doing all kinds of tests and having them look at my CT scans again. And I'm very grateful to them, because they did spare me some pretty invasive tests that a lot of people with my lung disease have to get. So I didn't have to have any kind of surgery. I did get a bronchoscopy, which is where they put something down your throat and sort of scrape your lungs and make sure that I didn't have any kind of active infection going on before they put me on immunosuppressants. I did spend a lot of time after that getting tested for all kinds of cancer to make sure that if I already had cancer, that we would not help spread it by putting me on immunosuppressants. And it was just a fight for my life at that point. I was on high doses of prednisone while we had the secondary immunosuppressant of Cellcept get started. And for anyone that's been on high doses of prednisone, it comes with a whole host of terrible, terrible side effects: weight gain, hair loss, insomnia, just the ups and downs of, roid rage is a real thing, even when you're prescribed it and not a bodybuilder or a wrestler or something like that. It was a pretty intense time, and I'm just grateful that I had a lot of family that were around to support me. My mother came in for 6 weeks. My stepmother came in for 3 weeks. My stepmother came to Mayo Clinic. I had a cousin come to Mayo Clinic to help support me. So I feel very strongly against those family members that don't rally around their loved ones when they are faced with something as terrible as a chronic illness.